Chapter 1. The Self-Esteem Trap. Problems with rating self-worth. If you want to harness the power within your mind, you must first stop drawing validation from an unhealthy source called self-esteem. The idea that you need to think highly of yourself all the time is a trap. It makes you worry too much about what others think of you. It causes you to compare yourself to others in unhelpful ways. And it makes it hard to improve yourself, because you don't want to admit when you do something wrong. Instead, you should practice accepting yourself unconditionally. Follow me as I show you how this works. You know that feeling maybe you crushed a big presentation or you got a promotion at work, and suddenly you're on a high thinking, yeah, I'm kind of amazing. I've really got it going on. That's the self-esteem high that our culture pushes on us from an early age, the idea that we should feel like a good person or a success when things are going well. But here's the issue. That whole self-esteem mindset is really a trap. Because just as quickly as you're riding that high of thinking you're hot stuff, something else happens. The next meeting doesn't go so well, your boss criticizes you, whatever. And bam, that self-worth you attach to your achievements comes crashing down. Suddenly you're berating yourself, I'm such a loser, I'll never get it right. See, the core problem with self-esteem is that it gets us ranking ourselves as a whole package, deciding whether we're an overall good or bad person based on our latest wins or losses. We are using a part to represent a whole. That's a crazy way to think. We're not gods or angels, we're regular, imperfect humans. Sometimes we knock it out of the park. Sometimes we fail miserably. Judging our entire self-worth off of that makes no sense. Here's a great example. Say you see someone walking down the street. You can't actually tell if they're a good person or bad person just by looking at them. All you see are the specific actions they're taking in that moment, which might be good, bad, or neutral. The idea of summarily deciding their whole self is good or bad based on that tiny data point is obviously flawed logic. That's what we're doing when we get caught in the self-esteem trap, though. We're taking whatever latest success or failure and making a sweeping overgeneralization about our entire self-worth from it. Maybe we nail a job interview and suddenly we pat ourselves on the back like I'm such a capable, intelligent person. Or we bomb a test and instantly we're like I'm just a useless idiot who can't do anything right. But think about it. Does it really make rational sense to make those all or nothing judgments about ourselves over a single data point? Our lives are constant mixtures of achievements, mistakes, highs, lows. We're not consistently brilliant or consistently inept. We're inconsistent humans who are just kind of muddling through, doing a mixture of impressive and embarrassing things every day. Yet when we get trapped in the self-esteem mindset, we forget that. We rate ourselves disastrously after every little bump in the road, or we get diluted senses of our own self-importance after small wins. And that opens up so many other risks and problems. For one, it makes us incredibly anxious and insecure. Think about how you felt going into a situation where your successful person's self-esteem was on the line. Maybe you've been on a roll at work, but now you have to give a big presentation to the board. You're likely to be plagued with doubts and anxiety because your funding of being so great is at stake. Whereas if you separate your self-worth from the outcome, you can be freer and more relaxed. Self-esteem can also lead to toxic comparisons between people. We've all seen those self-obsessed egomaniacs who think they're better than everyone because they have more accomplishments or status. Their self-esteem is inflated, so they look down on others as inferior, low self-esteem folks. Not exactly a healthy way to go through life or build meaningful relationships. On the flip side, having low self-esteem means constantly viewing yourself as lacking, unworthy, and fundamentally flawed. It makes it almost impossible to objectively see your skills, talents, and positive qualities. It's like wearing perpetual lenses of harsh self-criticism and self-loathing. Pretty dismal way to experience the world. The argument here is that these things just endlessly perpetuate each other. Have a setback that dents your self-esteem? Now you're trapped in feelings of being a failure and safety behaviors to protect your ego. Maybe even lashing out at others as defensive masks. Which of course leads to more self-esteem damage. And on the cycle goes. The overarching point is that self-esteem, whether lower or inflated, is an inherently irrational game. We're ranking and defining our entire multifaceted selves in these black and white absolutes based on inevitably imperfect behaviors. It's a thought pattern that simply doesn't align with reality. There's a great quote that captures this. If we walk down the street, we don't actually see good people or bad people. We just see humans doing some good things and some bad things. Nothing more, nothing less. There's no empirical test that can sort humans into strict winners or losers. We're just endless mixtures of both. So by the end of the day, the view that self-esteem as a complete trap, a skewed way of viewing ourselves that simply doesn't hold up to scrutiny, lays down the foundation for an alternative solution of unconditional self-acceptance. The idea that we can accept ourselves as imperfect humans, while still maintaining goals and standards for our behaviors. But more on that as we progress in this journey. For now, let's take a step back and be clear whether we're rating ourselves as shining suns of virtue or piles of irredeemable human waste. It's all an empty exercise based on delusion. Time to get off that self-esteem roller coaster for good. Chapter 2. Unconditional Self-Acceptance, a New Paradigm. So we've unpacked all the issues with self-esteem and why it's an inherently flawed and damaging mind trap, despite what society has drilled into us. The constant judgment, the anxiety, the defensiveness, who needs all that noise? But you might be thinking, okay, I get why self-esteem is problematic, but I still want to feel good about myself sometimes. I don't want to just resign myself to being a worthless sack of crap. Hold up, my friend. That's precisely the beauty of what we are proposing as an alternative, unconditional self-acceptance. This isn't about deciding you're a terrible person who should feel endlessly crappy. Quite the opposite. Unconditional self-acceptance, USA for short, gonna run with that abbreviation, simply means you accept yourself as an imperfect human, period. Not good, not bad, just a flawed work in progress like all of us. Here's the core mental shift. Instead of rating your entire self as laudable or pitiful, you separate that from the judgment of specific behaviors. If you want to evaluate yourself, or put yourself in a nutshell, all we could say is when you act well or you act poorly. You're always just an imperfect human who acts imperfectly. At worst, never a bad person. Makes sense, right? I'm sure you can think of examples of doing something stupid or unskillful, where it was obviously a flawed action, but you wouldn't conclude that it makes you a comprehensively flawed or bad person. You're just a human, having the occasional human moment. With unconditional self-acceptance, you extend that separating mindset to all domains of life. Maybe you bomb a test, get fired, get divorced. Those are undeniably unfortunate outcomes. But they don't mean your entire self is a roaring failure. They just reflect specific actions or results that didn't go as hoped. The beauty is, freeing yourself from the self-esteem mind prison allows you to examine those situations with objectivity and self-compassion. You can acknowledge, okay, I really bombed that exam. That sucks, and it's showing I need to work on XYZ skills. But it doesn't mean I'm universally idiotic or unworthy. From that grounded acceptance of being a human doing imperfect human things, you can then focus on making positive changes and working towards your goals rather than beating yourself up over being fundamentally flawed based on a setback. Your self-worth is safely separate from particular outcomes. Now, to be clear, unconditional self-acceptance doesn't mean no rating matter at all anymore. Not at all. You absolutely still want to evaluate your behaviors and determine if they are moving you towards your stated goals or not. The difference is, with self-esteem, if my goal is X and then I fail at X, I then interpret it as, therefore I suck as a total person. But with unconditional self-acceptance, if my goal is X and then I fail at X, I then interpret it as a failure or wrong approach in my behavior, but not a failure as a person, as that behavior is not taking me towards my goal, so I need to adjust my approach. In the former, your self-worth is disastrously intertwined with any particular result. In the latter, you can look at positive or negative data points simply as information about what's working or not working in your life. Your core self isn't shaken either way. This separation from self-evaluation is so powerful because it allows you to focus more clearly on achieving your goals. You're not anxious about your ego being on the line or defensive about criticism that feels like an attack on your entire person. Ultimately, unconditional self-acceptance cuts out all that extraneous mental baggage of rating yourself as superior, inferior, good, bad, winner, loser. It's not empirical. If we walk down the street, we don't see good people or bad people. We just see humans doing some good actions and some bad actions. With this mindset, you simply are who you are, a multifaceted human having a series of experiences, some satisfying and some not. Nothing more or less. From that grounded place, you can then turn your energy towards crafting the life you want, one step at a time. No constant self-recrimination needed. No self-aggrandizement needed either. Just unconditional acceptance of your imperfect work-in-progress self and clear sights on doing what matters most to you, separating truth from delusion. Part of what makes unconditional self-acceptance so powerful is that it aligns with reality rather than the delusional fictions we tend to tell ourselves. Think about it, where is the empirical evidence that any human is purely good or bad? We're complex beings who act with a mixture of wisdom and cluelessness, generosity and selfishness, diligence and laziness. Boiling that kaleidoscope of behaviors down to a single summarizing grade like I'm an A+ person or I'm worthless garbage is obviously disconnected from truth. When you walk down the street, you don't see people sporting halos or pitchforks to advertise their fixed moral status. All you see are imperfect humans taking imperfect actions, both positive and negative. Trying to judge entire selves from that is an overgeneralization. Unconditional self-acceptance simply sticks to observable facts. You're not a fantastic angel nor an irredeemable monster. Those are fictional extremes we consume from stories and media, not reality. You're just a human muddling through, displaying the full spectrum of capacities and limitations like we all do. No need to arbitrarily declare yourself amazing or abhorrent on any given day. This grounds us in truth. And from that grounded place of simply being a permissibly imperfect human being, we can then be free to build what we want in life without neurotic self-judgments constantly blinding us. A practical guide to unconditional self-acceptance. So how do we actually practice and embody this unconditional self-acceptance perspective? It's like learning any new habit. It takes persistent work to overcome our deeply grooved patterns of rating ourselves. One technique is using brief writing exercises throughout the day to stop and question your self-evaluations when they arise. So if you catch yourself thinking I'm such an idiot for forgetting that important file, or I'm an all-star for acing that exam, you'd pause and unpack that thought. Maybe write out, I seem to be rating my entire self-worth over this specific incident. But there is no objective evidence that forgetting one thing makes me an idiot. I am an imperfect human who will make occasional mistakes, and this was one of those times. It doesn't mean I am idiotic as a total person. The more you practice talking back to those self-rating stories, the more you'll build neural pathways for operating from the unconditional self-acceptance mentality instead. It's like retraining a stubborn habit through persistent new routines. I want to also suggest extending this separating mindset to how you view others. When you find yourself brewing resentment like, ugh, my boss is such an unreasonable jerk, you'd unpack that thought as, I am rating my boss's entire self as jerk based on one situation I didn't prefer. But he is simply a human behaving in an imperfect way, same as I do at times. His worth as a total person is indeterminate. The goal isn't to excuse or approve of all behaviors, but rather to simply look at each scenario as a human taking actions, some of which you prefer and some not. No need to create prison camps in your mind where you endlessly jail people for their flaws. Of course, this self-acceptance approach can take some work to embody. Our self-evaluation habits are biologically ingrained from an early age, but persistently chipping away at them through exercises and new mental routines allows us to slowly reset those default patterns. And the freedom on the other side is well worth the investment. Be near the paradox of more motivation. One heated debate around unconditional self-acceptance is the argument that it will just lead to apathy and stagnation. The reasoning goes, if I'm not motivated by feeling like a success or failure based on results, what will inspire me to keep growing? This conflates self-acceptance with resignation, when in fact, the opposite is true. Separating your self-worth from results allows you to gel purpose and enjoyment as core drivers. Human beings are wired to seek purpose, growth, and mastery of valuable skills. A self-accepting person can recognize, wow, public speaking is a powerful tool, and I'm really lacking in those skills right now. I want to develop them because of how beneficial that could be, not because it will make me a winner or something. From that grounded mindset, they're actually set up to take feedback and coaching with less defensiveness. You won't feel like criticism is an attack on your entire personhood, but just data to integrate as you pursue valued aims. The self-acceptance path also allows you to get intrinsic enjoyment from pursuing goals and challenges, rather than just pursuing things to prop up your ego or prove your merit. You're driven by the inherent passion and interest, not just external reinforcement of feeling like a success. In this view, setbacks and failures stop being decisive threats to your self-worth, so you can actually develop more perseverance and resilience. Poor results just show that a given strategy is not efficiently securing your preferences, not that you're flawed as a person. So you can flexibly adjust and keep practicing with equanimity. In the self-esteem mindset, failures are devastating because you viewed the result as defining your entire self. But in the self-acceptance mode, failures are just data points that help refine your approach to what deeply matters to you. Which would you expect to lead to more tenacity and growth over the long run? Exactly, it's the mindset not holding its entire identity hostage to results. So in this chapter, we've explored how suggested paradigm of unconditional self-acceptance allows us to stop wasting energy on unproductive self-evaluations and self-judgments. By firmly separating self-worth from particular behaviors and outcomes, you're freed to unapologetically pursue growth, purpose, and valued aims with objectivity and passion. No embellished ego, no deflated self-loathing, just grounded acceptance of your human scope and clear focus on what excites you. For those reasons and more, unconditional self-acceptance may in fact paradoxically unlock more tenacity and development than the self-esteem mindset ever could. So Chapter 3, the ABC model, how thoughts, not situations, create emotions. This chapter will dive deeper into one of the core frameworks for unconditional self-acceptance, the ABC model for understanding where emotions come from. This is crucial for dismantling the self-esteem mindset and cultivating unconditional self-acceptance. We'll start by establishing the standard societal view that our emotions arise directly from the situations we face in life. Using an extreme example like winning the lottery and feeling elated, we will illustrate how people intuitively think. The situation is winning lottery, which develops into an emotion of feeling elated. So it appears like it moves from a situation to a feeling or emotion. But as we'll explain, this intuitive perspective is fundamentally flawed. Our emotions don't actually stem from circumstances themselves, but from the subjective thoughts and beliefs we have about those circumstances. Enter the ABC model, which breaks this process down more accurately. Aids up, activating event, the situation, like winning the lottery. B are your beliefs, thoughts about the event. C mind, the emotional consequences driven by your beliefs. Using the lottery example, the process is more accurately. I won the lottery. Beta, this is incredible. I can buy anything, retire early, live my dreams. C, a sheer feeling of intense elation, euphoria. The critical piece is that B, your subjective thoughts, are what directly cause the emotional response C, not simply the A, the circumstance itself. To hammer this point home, we'll explore other examples where the same A, situation, could lead to vastly different C, emotions depending on one's B, beliefs. Like getting laid off from a job, one person may spiral into depression, another may feel relieved depending on their unique perspectives. We will invoke the classic counseling example of two people passing an ice cream shop on a hot day. One feels joy and craving, the other feels guilty and anxious based on their individual systems of beliefs about ice cream, diet, etc. Same A, different C. Once this counterintuitive model clicks, it becomes clear why self-esteem beliefs are so problematic. If you believe self-worth is tied to achievements, B, then any setback, A, will flood you with feelings of self-loathing and inadequacy, C. But if your core belief, B, is one of unconditional self-acceptance, the same setback won't rock your core emotional foundation. This unravels the power of beliefs to create our emotional experiences, for better or worse. Which means you have more control than you realized. If you don't like how you're feeling, you need to inspect and update your core beliefs about the activating situation. From here on, we will look at techniques for catching and transforming destructive thought patterns. But mastering the ABC model is the crucial foundation. Once we stop mistakenly thinking circumstances directly cause our emotions, we open the door to true self-acceptance regardless of situations. The self-esteem roller coaster stems from fusing our core worth to circumstantial wins or losses. But by separating that equation, we get off that exhausting ride once and for all. And the ABC model provides the mental framework to do just that. I would like to emphasize the above points further to help you understand this concept. It is crucial you do because your psychological progress depends on it. If I asked you why you feel a certain emotion at any given moment, chances are your explanation would go something like this. Well, I feel anxious because I have a big presentation coming up at work. I felt really happy earlier because the weather was so beautiful and sunny. I'm frustrated and angry because my partner hasn't been pulling their weight around the house. In each case, you're pointing to the situation in your life as the direct cause of your emotional state. And it makes perfect sense. That's how we're wired to interpret things from an early age. Something happens to us or around us, and that automatically determines how we'll feel about it, right? Not so fast. This mistaken situational view of what creates our emotions is actually one of the core delusions that keeps us trapped in self-esteem issues and emotional turmoil. The truth is, your emotions don't arise from circumstances at all. They stem from your subjective thoughts and beliefs about those circumstances. I know, that sounds counterintuitive, but apply this simple ABC model and it all becomes crystal clear. A, the activating event, circumstances or situation itself, the thing that happened. B, R, your personal beliefs, interpretations, or thoughts about the event. C, ships, the actual emotional consequences. Driven by your beliefs about A, let's use a classic example, winning the lottery. From our old situational perspective, the chain of events seems straightforward. Situation, I won $50 million in the lottery. And that progressed into the feeling, intense elation, euphoria, and excitement. But according to the ABC model, there's a crucial step in between that we often overlook. A, oh God, I won $50 million in the lottery. B, this is absolutely incredible. I'm set for life. I can buy anything I want, retire early, travel in luxury, and never work another day. What a dream come true. C, bores, intense elation, euphoria, and excitement. Can you see the difference? Your emotion doesn't stem directly from the $50 million event itself. It comes from the specific beliefs and thoughts you have about that event in this case. Extremely positive beliefs about solving all life's problems and living in ecstatic luxury. But let's flip the script. What if instead your belief was, A, I won $50 million in the lottery. B, oh shit, I'm totally screwed now. I had no idea how to manage that much money. Everyone will be hitting me up for handouts. The government will take a huge cut, and I'll probably go bankrupt within a few years because I'm an idiot with cash. What a nightmare. See now feelings of dread, anxiety, even depression. See what I mean? Same activating event A, but your unique belief B about the implications of that event determines an entirely different emotional fallout C. The circumstance itself doesn't make you feel any particular way. It's the mental spin you put on it that shapes your experience. And this distinction applies to literally every situation in your life, big or small. Here are some other examples that might give better clarity. Example 1. Situation 1. Two people pass by an ice cream shop on a hot summer day. Person A thoughts, ice cream would be so refreshing and delicious right now. Person A feeling, joyful craving. Person B thoughts, I really shouldn't have any ice cream. I'll regret it and undo my diet. Person B feeling, anxious guilt. Example 2. Situation 2. A teenager gets a D on their final math exam. Thought A, this is a disaster. I'm such an idiot. How will I ever get into college now? Feeling A, shame, depression, labeling self as deficient. Thought B, okay, that's disappointing, but it's just one exam. I can improve next semester. Feeling B, momentary sadness, motivation to adapt approach. Example 3. Situation 3. You lose your job due to company downsizing. Thought A, I'm a total failure who got fired. I'll never find another role and my career is over. Feeling A, devastation, hopelessness, self-loathing. Thought B, that really sucks, but it's not about me. I've got great skills to offer the right role. Feeling B, disappointment, but also confidence. Determination. In every case, it's not the activating situation itself directly causing the emotional response. It's the particular belief, perspective, or interpretation you have about that situation. Your thoughts, not the circumstance, determine your feeling. This is such a profound realization because it means you have infinitely more control over your emotional life than you feared. You're not a leaves blown in the wind victim of whatever chaotic circumstances get thrown your way. By becoming aware of your internal belief systems about situations, you can choose different perspectives that lead to more empowering emotional experiences. And as we have earlier emphasized, this realization is utterly crucial for dismantling the whole self-esteem mind trap. Because when you mistakenly think situations directly determine your worth and emotional state, any negative circumstances become disastrous blows to your identity and well-being. But within the ABC model, you can separate situational data from your core being. Maybe you failed at something, A? But did that alone make you a failure? Only if you kept telling yourself you're a failure based on that selective situation, B. In reality, you could just as easily reinterpret the same setback with different beliefs. I failed my first attempt at this. B. Okay, that's frustrating, but it just means I have more learning and practice to do. This is a process. C. Bowed, determined acceptance to keep working at it. With this awareness, you're freed from catastrophizing over short-term outcomes. You realize they are transient data points, not self-definers. Your chosen beliefs about them are what determine your lived experience. And from that grounded place of separating situations from your sense of self and worth, unconditional self-acceptance becomes eminently easier. Because think about it, what basis do you have for judging your entire self after looking at results through this ABC lens? The situation is neutral, A, and your thoughts about it are fundamentally reversible, B. There's no permanent entity there to even make a sweeping judgment about. You're always just the observer making that next choice, what perspective and beliefs. B. Do you want to adopt about any given circumstance? Those thoughts shape everything, including whether you feel self-loathing, C, or self-acceptance, C, about the same situations. By arming ourselves with this ABC mental framework, we're finally free from furiously rating our entire selves based on external happenings. Wins, losses, opportunities, and setbacks become situational data, A, that we get to decide how to process, B, not compromising self-verdicts written in inescapable stone. And from that liberated vantage point, the journey to unconditional self-acceptance becomes eminently walkable. No more being hostage to self-esteem wages on your worth or identity, just an empowered human, choosing their perspectives and emotions one step after the next. Chapter 4. Dealing with negative emotions like guilt, shame, and anxiety. You know, these feelings can really weigh us down, am I right? It's like they just latch onto us and don't want to let go. Take guilt, for instance. We've all been there, did something we knew we shouldn't have, and then bam, that familiar pit in our stomach kicks in. Maybe you cheated on a diet, said something you regretted, or let someone down. Whatever it was, all of a sudden you're drowning in feelings of guilt. I'm such an awful person, you think to yourself. How could I have done that? And shame? Oh man, shame is brutal. It's like guilt's ugly cousin. When we're consumed by shame, we don't just feel bad about what we did, we feel bad about who we are. We start questioning our very worth as human beings. I know that feeling all too well. You make one mistake, drop the ball on something, and suddenly you're spiraling into this deep well of self-loathing. Like, of course I messed that up. I'm a total failure at everything. It's a crappy place to be, my friend. Then there's anxiety, that pesky feeling of dread and unease. Sometimes it creeps up on us for no apparent reason. You're just going about your day, everything's fine, and then bam. Your heart starts racing, your palms get sweaty, and your mind is flooded with worries and what-if scenarios. Other times, we know exactly what's causing our anxiety, an upcoming event, a stressful situation, etc. Either way, anxiety can make us feel like we're trapped in our own minds, with no escape. Aren't negative emotions just a joy to deal with? Said no one ever. They sap our energy, kill our motivation, and make us want to curl up in a ball and hide from the world. And the crazy part? Most of the time, we're the ones creating these feelings for ourselves. It's not the situation itself that's the problem. It's how our minds internalize and blow it out of proportion. But here's the thing, as much as guilt, shame, and anxiety suck, they don't have to rule our lives. We can learn to overcome them and cultivate more positive, empowering mindsets instead. It's all about identifying the irrational thoughts and beliefs that feed into these negative emotions. How, you ask? Well, that's where this resource comes in. The core idea is that we shouldn't be making demands of ourselves, others, or the world around us. Sure, We can have preferences. I'd prefer not to fail at this task, or it would be nice if my partner did the dishes once in a while. Preferences are fine. They give us goals to work toward. But when we turn those preferences into demands with words like must, should, and have to, oh boy, that's when we open the door for all those negative emotions. Think about it. How many times have you told yourself I must succeed at this or else I'm a total failure, or my partner should know better than to leave dirty dishes in the sink? When we put those kinds of unrealistic demands on ourselves and the world, we're inevitably going to fall short. And what happens when we fall short of our demands? Our minds start attacking us with thoughts like, "You idiot, you failed again!" Or "Why am I stuck with such an inconsiderate partner?" Before you know it, you're swimming in guilt, shame, and anxiety. The solution? Catching yourself every time you start adding those musts, shoulds, and demanding absolutist thoughts. Stop yourself and rephrase things as preferences instead. I prefer to succeed at this, but failing isn't the end of the world. I can learn from it. Or I wish my partner would clean up after themselves more often, but they're human, and humans aren't perfect. At first, it'll feel weird and unnatural to talk to yourself this way, but over time, as you replace angry demands with calm preferences, you'll notice those negative emotions loosen their grip. The guilt, shame, and anxiety won't have anywhere to latch onto in your mind. Instead, you'll feel a shift toward emotions like understanding, empathy for yourself and others, and determination to keep working toward your preferences. Of course, none of this is easy. Our minds have been programmed with years of unhealthy thought patterns. But by persistently applying the principles of identifying irrational thoughts, questioning them, and reframing them, we can slowly but surely kick those toxic emotions to the curb. We just have to keep at it day by day. At the end of the day, my friends, we can't avoid feeling negative emotions altogether. They're programmed into us as human beings. But we can learn to disconnect from them and prevent them from taking over our entire mindset. Guilt, shame, and anxiety don't have to be prisons. They can be temporary visitors that we acknowledge, learn from, and let go. The choice is yours. So what do you say? Are you ready to break free from the chains of negativity and be the captain of your own mind? All right, so now that we've talked about getting a handle on those pesky negative emotions, it's time to dive deeper into what's at the root of them: demands, musts, and shoulds. You see, most of our emotional turmoil doesn't actually come from the situations we face in life. It comes from the irrational thought patterns and unrealistic expectations we impose on those situations. We turn preferences into demands by telling ourselves things must be a certain way. My boss must appreciate all my hard work. I should never make mistakes. The world has to be a fair and just place at all times. When reality inevitably fails to match up with those rigid demands, our minds go into full freak-out mode. And bam! There's the anxiety, anger, shame, you name it. The alternative? Learning to separate preferences from demands. Having the self-awareness to catch yourself when you start using absolutist language like must, should, and have to. Instead of saying, "My life must go according to plan," a demand, you'd rephrase it as, "I really prefer for things to go smoothly. But I can still be at peace if plans change unexpectedly." See the difference? With preferences, you open yourself up to different outcomes. You're not setting yourself up for disappointment and negative emotions when things don't play out exactly as you'd hoped. Of course, pulling this off is easier said than done. Our minds love to jump into demand mode and start catastrophizing over every little thing. But by persistently catching ourselves and reframing our thoughts, we can slowly shed those unhealthy thought habits. It's all about building what's called unconditional self-acceptance. Instead of rating your entire self-worth based on behaviors or outcomes, you accept yourself as the imperfect human that you are. You ditch the all or nothing thinking of "I'm amazing" or "I'm a worthless pile of garbage." Because at the end of the day, we're all just flawed works in progress, doing our best to muddle through this crazy thing called life. And that's okay! The goal isn't to never screw up or always have everything figured out. The goal is to dust ourselves off after missteps, identify what we can work on, and keep putting one foot in front of the other. Which brings me to the whole idea of appropriate versus inappropriate negative emotions. See, negative feelings in and of themselves aren't bad or wrong. If you have a strong preference for peace but see wars raging on, yeah, It makes total sense to feel disappointment, sadness, concern, what I'd call appropriate negative emotions. We're human, and part of the human experience is feeling a range of emotions, positive and negative. Where we get into trouble is when we take those situational feelings and globe them into generalized negative states about ourselves or our lives. Instead of "I feel disappointed that my efforts weren't successful this time," it becomes "I'm a total failure, and I'll never amount to anything." That's when disappointment transforms into soul-crushing despair. An inappropriate negative emotion. The same applies to concepts like guilt, shame, and anxiety that we discussed earlier. Feeling uncomfortable after making a mistake? Totally appropriate and expected. Telling yourself you're a wretched, unlovable human being who deserves to be miserable forever? Not so appropriate or productive. Now, you might be thinking, sure, but aren't negative emotions like guilt and shame somehow useful from an evolutionary perspective? Don't they keep us moral and discourage bad behavior? It's a fair question, and one that a lot of people wrestle with when first being introduced to this line of thinking. The way I was taught to look at it is this: guilt, shame, and anxiety may have had some evolutionary advantages back when human brains were first developing. Our ancient ancestors weren't so skilled at nuanced thinking, so leaning into harsh self-judgment could have helped reinforce survival behaviors. But modern humans have the capability for so much more cognitive complexity. We can learn to motivate ourselves through compassion, understanding, and an authentic desire for growth, rather than harsh self-punishment. At the end of the day, does feeling guilty about eating a donut really inspire you to make better choices moving forward? Or does it usually just lead to a shame spiral and giving up entirely? Exactly. Negative emotions out of evolutionary necessity or lack of conscious awareness, I can understand. But when we choose not to wallow in negativity, despite having the mental capacity to redirect our thinking, well, that's just shooting ourselves in the foot. All right, let's talk some more about these demands, musts and shoulds that tend to be at the root of so much emotional turmoil. Because once you understand how they work, you'll start to realize just how much power you have over your own mindset. See, most of us walk around putting all these rigid rules and expectations on ourselves, on others, and on the world at large. I must succeed at everything I try. My partner should never forget to take out the trash. Life has to be fair and things have to go my way. We litter our self-talk with demands like must, should, have to, and need to without even realizing it. And at first glance, some of those demands might even seem reasonable or justifiable. Like, yeah, of course you'd prefer that your partner remember the trash, right? Who wouldn't want a hassle-free life where everything works out exactly as you'd hoped? But here's the catch. Reality doesn't actually have to cooperate with any of our demands. Your preferences, desires, and goals, those don't automatically become universally binding laws just because you really, really want them to. The universe doesn't owe you success just because you worked hard for something. Your partner's brain doesn't automatically rewire itself to remember the trash schedule just because you think it should. Sucky stuff happening is, quite literally, just part of the deal with this whole being a human on planet Earth thing. And it's when our demands smash into the reality that no, the world doesn't actually have to work that way. That's when the emotional fireworks get set off. Because our minds tell us it must be this way. It should be this way! This can't be happening! And then, since reality continues on regardless, not conforming to our demands, our minds throw a tantrum. This is awful. This is unacceptable. How could this happen? And there emerge all those negative emotions like anxiety, anger, bitter disappointment, resentment, and the crippling sponge of depression. Think about it. When's the last time you felt those kinds of intensely crappy feelings in a situation where you didn't have rigid demands and expectations? Where you were just rolling with things as they unfolded, no biggie? Probably can't remember because it doesn't happen. Our demands and unshakable musts and shoulds create the psychological environment for negative emotions to not just exist, but to completely dominate our mindset and identity. I'm furious and shaken up because my spouse forgot to take out the trash today again, god damn it! What's wrong with them? This is unacceptable. This is a total demand-induced meltdown. Contrast that to taking a preferences-based approach. Ugh, man, my spouse forgot about the trash again. I really wish they could remember these things more consistently because it creates an inconvenience. but they're only human and we all space on stuff sometimes. Not the end of the world at all. See how different that feels? With the second perspective, there's no demands being shattered, so there's no opening for resentment, bitterness, or other negative junk to come crashing in. You can address the situation in a cool, collected manner. No tantrums. Of course, in the heat of the moment, it's not always easy to detach from our demands and see things through a preference-based lens. Our minds have been conditioned to think in all or nothing, absolutist terms for years, maybe even decades. But that's exactly why this idea of catching our demands is so powerful. Every time you hear yourself saying, "I have to," or "they need to," or "it must be," you can pause and rephrase things as preferences. I would really prefer for that thing to happen, and I can be at peace if it doesn't. The world won't end. Over time, doing this rewires your brain to stop expecting the world to conform to your individual demands. You become loosed, more easygoing, and can roll with whatever punches come your way. And negative emotions don't have that same power over you because you're not building up huge towers of demands for reality to inevitably knock down. I mean, think about it. When's the last time you felt actual soul-shaking anxiety, anger, and resentment over something you had a very casual, whatever preference about? Probably never, because the energy isn't there. Those ugly negative emotions can only take root when we've invested huge stakes and absolutely rigid expectations into something. Now let's dive into differentiating between preferences and demands in a detailed way. All right, so we've talked about how demands like musts and shoulds set us up for emotional turmoil. The obvious next question is, how the heck do we tell when we're operating from demands versus simple preferences? Because let's be real, on the surface level, demands can seem pretty darn reasonable. I'd treat my friends and family with respect. The political system must each be reformed to be more just and equitable. Demands often get wrapped up in ideals and virtuous-sounding rhetoric. But here's the trademark difference. Preferences keep you open, demands make you rigid. A preference has this air of, yes, I'd very much like for that to happen, and I can roll with it if things go a different direction. Demands, on the other hand, are articulated in absolutist binary terms. It's all or nothing. For example, let's say you have a strong preference for making partner at your law firm this year. You've worked your butt off, billed tons of hours, and you'd very much like for all that effort to get recognized with a promotion. Reasonable preference, right? But then your mind kicks into demand mode. I want to make partner this year. I should get promoted after all my hard work. If I don't get it, that means I'm a failure and this was all for nothing. See how that preference got inflated from a reasonable? Wouldn't it be nice if, to this panicked attack on your self-worth and the very meaning of your efforts? That's the signature of demands versus preferences. With a preference mindset, even if you don't make partner, you can still go, damn, I'm disappointed and that really sucks. But it doesn't negate all the work I put in or make me a failure as a person. I just didn't get what I wanted, this time. But with demands, you've essentially vowed that if X doesn't happen, it will be born catastrophic, K. Your self-esteem gets obliterated. Your efforts were meaningless. That's how demands punch you in the gut emotionally. Another telltale sign you've slipped into demand mode is if you catch yourself having intense negative emotions like anxiety. Oh God, what if I don't make partner? I'll be ruining everything. Shanger, house and dare, they not promote me after all the money I've billed for them. That's depression. I can't even get this one thing right. I'm such a loser. Those kinds of pervasive, globalized, negative emotions pretty much never happen with preferences. You might feel disappointment, sure, but not the soul-crushing stuff like anger, anxiety, and depression. That's because preferences are inherently tied to specific situational wants, not overarching necessities. You're not telling yourself, I have to get this or else. With preferences, even if things don't go your way, your sense of self-worth isn't inextricably intertwined with the outcome. And one of my favorite examples to illustrate the difference is with dating. Demand we now must get asked out by Jessica, the girl I have a crush on. If she rejects me or doesn't feel the same way, that means I'm undateable and unlovable. Nas preference. I would very much prefer for Jessica to say yes to going out with me as I find her interesting and attractive. and I can accept if she isn't interested, as that's just life. It won't shake my overall self-esteem or sense of being a valid person. Can you feel the distinction between how those two mindsets would leave you emotionally if Jessica did indeed turn you down? In the demand scenario, you're shattered. In the preference mindset, you can brush it off with an bummer, but not the end of the world. At the end of the day, the goal isn't to completely eradicate preferences from your mind. We're human, so we're always going to have things we want or don't want to an extent. And the key is being able to 1. Recognize when you've jumped from reasonable preferences to rigid demands, and 2. Catch yourself before those demands set off negative emotional chain reactions. So pay attention to your self-talk. Anytime you hear commands like I, must, or they, should, or if X doesn't happen, it means a ding, 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 you've slipped into demand territory. Those are your cues to pause and reframe things in a preference-based mindset. It takes practice, but separating preferences from demands is a revolutionary act of self-nurturing. You're actively denying your mind's desire to build up expectations that can never be met, and thereby avoiding all the despair, resentment, and angst that trails behind unmet demands. That's how you cultivate a calmer, more resilient sense of self. Chapter 5. Unconditional self-acceptance and avoiding global evaluations. All right, so we've talked about catching our demands versus preferences. But there's another big piece to this mastering your mindset puzzle: unconditional self-acceptance. See, most of us have gotten into this really toxic habit of tying our entire self-worth and identity to specific behaviors, achievements, or traits. It's like we have this inner scoring system where we're constantly grading ourselves as either amazing, incredible human beings deserving of love, or absolute worthless pieces of garbage. And where do these extreme "I'm the best" or "I'm a total failure" narratives come from? You guessed it, demands and musts. We tell ourselves things like, I must not succeed at this job, or I'm a useless loser. I should never screw up in my relationships, or I'm a terrible partner. My life has to go perfectly according to plan, or I've wasted my existence. Whoa, a bit dramatic, no? But that's how our minds operate if left unchecked. We conflate specific behaviors and outcomes with our entire identity and worth as human beings, aka global evaluations. Here's an example to illustrate. Let's say you're really trying to stick to a diet and healthy eating routine. One night you end up blowing it and binging on a bunch of cookies and chips. If you're in the grip of demands and global evaluations, your mind will start screaming something like, "You never stick to anything! You have the no discipline whatsoever. You're just a weak, lazy, disgusting slob, and you'll never get your life together." See how that one specific instance of slipping up on your diet instantly metamorphosed into this extreme, overgeneralized self-attack? That's the danger of global evaluations. One small bump in the road somehow gets equated to a total, irredeemable character flaw. The alternative? Unconditional self-acceptance. The practice of separating your inherent worth as a human being from specific behaviors and outcomes. It's the radical act of looking at yourself as a flawed work in progress instead of grading whether you're an A+ or F human based on what you did or didn't do. With unconditional self-acceptance, if you binged on junk food, you could acknowledge, yeah, that wasn't super cool of me and goes against what I'm working towards. But it doesn't make me a disgusting person or actually say anything about my discipline. I just got derailed this one time and I can recommit tomorrow. No overgeneralizing. No maximizing or catastrophizing a small, stupid action into the ultimate failing of your entire life's efforts. Just clear-eyed objectivity about what happened, without it shattering your overall self-concept. Because here's the truth. We all screw up sometimes. We all fall short of our preferences and ideals at certain points. That's just part of being a wildly imperfect, complicated, emotionally messy human being on this planet. The unconditional self-acceptance mindset simply acknowledges that reality with compassion. Conversely, when you're in the grips of global evaluations and demands, you de-run from that reality. You hold yourself to these insane, dehumanizing standards of perfection. And if you can never be 100% perfectly disciplined, completely on point, following all your routines robotically at every waking moment, well, then you're a worthless sack of crap, right? Do you see how insane that is? How that's no way to actually inspire yourself to grow and develop as a person. Quite the opposite. It leads to becoming bitter, hopeless, and giving up entirely because, hey, I'm just a waste of space. So why bother improving? The unconditional self-acceptance mindset is all about avoiding that despair trap. It's recognizing, okay, sure, I'm not perfect, yo. I still have plenty of flaws, blind spots, and growing to do. And I can accept myself with compassion as the imperfect human that I am, while still working to improve. Because at the end of the day, who really expects perfection all the time? Only the emotionally disturbed, toxic mind, fueled by demands and global evaluations. By letting go of that dysfunctional mindset, you open yourself to being a lot kinder, more nurturing, and effective in your self-coaching. It's the difference between motivation born of inspired self-love, yeah, I can do better in that area and I believe in myself, versus toxic self-hatred. Oh God, I'm worthless scum and I'll never amount to anything, so I might as well give up. Which approach do you think leads to more growth long-term? Exactly. So in summary, ditch the global evaluations and expectations of perfection in favor of unconditional self-acceptance. See yourself as a flawed work in progress, not as categorically good or bad based on specific behaviors. It's ultimately a much saner and more nurturing way to move through this crazy life. Chapter 6. The power of questioning irrational beliefs and contradicting them. All right, so we've covered some deep mindset shifts around demands versus preferences and unconditional self-acceptance. But you might be wondering, okay, but how do I actually implement these concepts in the heat of the moment when my mind is spiraling? That's where the practical technique of SAT, questioning your irrational beliefs, comes in. Because let's be real, simply being told have more self-acceptance or don't make demands isn't enough. Our minds are stubborn creatures of habit. We need a specific protocol to interrupt those dysfunctional thought patterns. The premise here is pretty simple. Our negative emotions don't actually arise from situations or circumstances themselves. They emerge from the your stories we tell ourselves about those circumstances, the judgments, expectations, and rigid rules we apply. For example, you don't feel crippling anxiety just because you have a work presentation coming up. You feel anxiety because your mind is catastrophizing with thoughts like, I have sought to give a perfect presentation, or I'll get fired and be a total failure. See how it's the irrational belief that's causing the angst? The work of questioning your beliefs involves looking at those stressful thoughts and, well, questioning them, holding them up to a simple but powerful query. What is the evidence that this thought is true? Let's take that work presentation example. Your mind is telling you, they have to give a perfect presentation or I'll get fired and be a total failure. Seems stressful, right? But then you question that irrational belief. What is the evidence that I have to give a perfect presentation? What evidence is there that even a subpar 1 means I'm a failure who will get fired? And as you sit with it, you quickly realize there is no evidence for that belief. It's just an overblown, completely irrational assumption your mind cooked up. Sure, you'd prefer to give a great presentation, but there's no cosmic law that you must be perfect or face dire consequences. From there, you can start contradicting that initial irrational belief with more rational self-talk. While I prefer to give an exceptional presentation, the truth is, perfection is not required. Even if I make some mistakes, that doesn't make me a failure or mean I'll be fired. I'm human and imperfection is expected sometimes. I'll simply do my best. See how just taking that one irrational belief and questioning, contradicting it completely diffuses the anxiety? Your mind no longer has anything irrational to latch onto and spin itself up over. This process of questioning and contradicting becomes even more powerful when dealing with harsh, negative judgments about yourself. Let's say you made a mistake at work and your mind goes, I'm such an idiot. I'm terrible at this job and don't deserve to be here. Well, pretty brutal self-attack, right? But then you question it. What evidence is there that I'm actually an idiot and don't deserve this job over one mistake? As you sit with it, the irrationality becomes clear. One error doesn't negate all your skills and hard work. From there, you can contradict that negative self-judgment. While I made a mistake, That doesn't make me an outright idiot or mean I don't deserve my career. I'm an imperfect human who will make errors sometimes, and I'm generally competent at my job. This one incident doesn't define me. Doing this process robustly, really diving in and clearly articulating the contradictions to your irrational thoughts loosens the grip of negative emotions over time. Your mind simply has less and less destructive ammunition to work with. Now, is it easy at first? Of course not! Our minds can be stubborn buggers, fiercely clinging to irrational fears and harsh self-attacks we've internalized for years. But like any skill, questioning and contradicting your beliefs gets easier with practice. More natural, more automated. That's why it's so powerful to work this technique in some form, consistently. Some people will journal about their irrational thoughts versus contradictions every morning. Others will do it in the moment whenever they feel angst or negativity creeping in. Finding what works best for your personality. The key is repetition. Every time you question, what's the proof? And contradict your mind's irrational judgments, you're slowly retraining neural pathways. You're becoming more adept at spotting and dismissing those toxic thought patterns in the moment before they can consume you. Which brings us back to the deepest core of unconditional self-acceptance. Because at its heart, contradicting your irrational beliefs is an act of self-nurturing, of protecting your mind from modes of thought that harm your emotions, motivation, and identity. You wouldn't nurture a loved one by constantly telling them they're worthless idiots based on small mistakes, right? Of course not. You'd be patient, compassionate, and frame things objectively without harsh judgments. Questioning and contradicting is how you extend that same nurturing patience and objectivity to yourself. So keep at it! Question those irrational beliefs, articulate clear contradictions, and watch how your emotional life transforms over time. Your mindset will become a sanctuary of peace and self-acceptance, rather than a haunting ground for harsh negative judgments. It just takes practice. Chapter 7. The evolutionary perspective on guilt, shame, and anxiety. So the big idea here is that while guilt, shame, and anxiety might seem pretty useless and crappy for us modern humans, there could be a reason why we ended up with these weird negative feelings kicking around in our brain software. Here's how. 1. Overgeneralization. Like thousands of years ago, our ancient ancestor humans didn't have the sharpest tools in the shed, brain-wise. They couldn't really distinguish between saying I'd prefer to avoid that rustling bush and I must avoid that rustling bush at all costs. So rather than just having a healthy preference to maybe avoid potential danger, their brain was like life or death situation. Must avoid bush! And feeling a bunch of angsty anxiety about it maybe helped motivate them to get their butt out of there, even if it ended up just being the wind and no real threat. Better to be a paranoid basket case and survive than to be all chill and get eaten by a wild animal, am I right? 2. Underdeveloped brain power. Building on that, the theory is that our ancient ancestral brains literally couldn't comprehend the difference between 1. Having a strong preference, I really want to avoid that bush. 2. Having an absolutist irrational demand, I must avoid that bush at all costs. So feeling stuff like excessive guilt about failing to live up to an unreasonable demand, or anxiety, shame about potentially failing some ridiculous obligation, may have been a learned adaptation to keep those underbaked brains motivated toward survival behaviors. Even if the guilt, anxiety was kind of overblown and inappropriate, it was better than being all chill and failing to do what needed to be done to survive and pass on those overgeneralizing genes. 3. Genetic predispositions. Lastly, around 50% of our personality traits and tendencies, including guilt, shame, anxiety, probably have some genetic roots and biological backstory. Maybe having a genetic predisposition toward feeling a bit of excessive, irrational guilt or anxiety gave those ancient humans a slight edge in dangerous situations where following their musts and shoulds was a matter of life or death. So in essence, the idea is that while guilt, shame, and anxiety are pretty crappy feelings that seem to cause more harm than good for us modern humans, they may have been useful adaptations that helped our ancient ancestors survive and pass on their genes in harsher environments. But the good news is that now, with our bigger modern brains, we can use rationality and conscious thought to override those outdated hand-me-downs when they're no longer serving us. We don't have to be slaves to guilt, shame, and anxiety if we wise up to where those feelings are really coming from a bunch of irrational demands and overgeneralizations. Chapter 8. The addiction model and the powerlessness versus personal power. So another really interesting point worth digging is the whole addiction model, and this idea of powerlessness that gets pushed in a lot of mainstream addiction recovery circles. You know what I'm talking about, stuff like the first step in Alcohol Anonymous being, I admit I am powerless over alcohol, and treating addiction like a disease that renders you totally helpless against indulging in your vice of choice. Well, that whole notion of powerlessness is just crap. Here's why. 1. The powerlessness myth. Look, if you were truly powerless over your addiction, it would mean that, like, the bottle of booze literally just flew through the air, smashed you in the face, and then poured itself down your throat while you were unconscious, right? Or maybe someone had a gun to your head saying, smoke this crack rock or I'll blow your brains out. Then sure, in those outrageous scenarios, you could say you were overpowered and had no choice. But in reality, you're the one making the decision to indulge in that addiction. Whether it's food, alcohol, drugs, whatever. You have the power to pick up that substance and ingest it. If it was a behavior like porn and masturbation or some other behavioral addiction, you are the one who decides when to engage that dysfunctional habit, which also means you have the power not to do it. Saying I'm powerless doesn't make you powerless. It just becomes a lame excuse to keep indulging because, well, I'm just a powerless little addict. What can I do? 2. The disease myth. But what about the whole addiction is a disease model that's so prevalent? Sure, there may be some genetic predispositions or biological factors that influence addictive tendencies. But that's not the same as it being an actual disease you catch like the flu. When's the last time you heard of someone overcoming the flu just by changing their thinking and mindset? Doesn't really work that way for the common cold or cancer. But with addiction, changing your mindset and thought patterns is exactly how you overcome it, by disputing those irrational must beliefs that gives that addiction its power. Plus, even if addiction was a literal disease, which it isn't, the solution would still be the same: stop indulging in the addictive substance or behavior. So calling it a disease is kind of a red herring. By that I mean it's misleading. It distracts you from the real problem or important clue. Unleash your personal power. At the end of the day, this resource is all about empowering people to use their personal power, free will, and capability for rational thinking to improve their lives and kick bad habits, addictions to the curb. Rather than taking a powerless victim mindset of I'm just a helpless addict or it's just genetic, I can't control myself, the right approach is about realizing you're the one in control. You have the power to indulge or abstain. You get to decide which thoughts to accept and which irrational beliefs to dispute. It's about owning your personal power and using tools like questioning those irrational musts, building strategies and techniques to avoid triggers, and taking full responsibility for making positive changes in your life. No more lame excuses about powerlessness or it's just a disease I can't overcome. You're the captain of your own ship. Ain't no disease or genetic code that can take away your human ability to choose a better path. So, in essence, while the mainstream addiction treatment world pushes this whole disease, powerlessness narrative, this resource is advocating for the opposite, recognizing and harnessing your personal power to make positive changes through rational thinking and disputing those disempowering beliefs. I will provide more empowering videos like this. Check the comments for further help. See you in the next video.